Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Septimont is coming to Wuthering Waves and most likely in the next few patches of the game. Version 2.3's special program did add a little bit more information about Septimont and confirms that what we are saying here is true. It also confirms that Zoni is definitely inspired by Achilles thanks to Talos. Now usually I do my research and then write a script, but I know that sometimes there is so much information that I go a bit too fast. So instead, we're going to go through everything in real time, and this way you'll know exactly how we get to see what Septimont looks like. Well, most likely that is. Now you might be wondering, what the hell is Septimont? Is it a country, or a city, or is it your grandma's cat? Spoilers, it's not a cat. Meow. There are some places and texts currently in the game that talk about Septimont, so let's quickly go over it before we show you what it looks like. Alright, so right here in the background, and this is in the southeast of the Boer waters, as you can see by the map, we have an area that we don't know the name of officially. We think this is Septimont, mostly because of this part here and the surrounding mountains. A Septimont translates to 7 mountains in Latin, and over here we have a bunch of mountains, and if we have the full view, it will most likely be 7 mountains. But is this a country or city by itself? Now the first piece of text where we're gonna find the mentioning of Septimont will be in the essays of the Regenesi drama. And it says, this paper reviews recent research trends and developments regarding the origins of drama culture in the Raguna and Septimont regions. Now because Septimont and Raguna are mentioned here in the same context, it is an indication that Septimont is another big city area like Raguna that is part of the country rinascita. And if we scroll further down in the text, it says, one of the most commendable scenes in The Golden Bow, which is a reference to a real-life book called The Golden Bow about religion, is the concluding scene 3. And there are 5 storylines that converge all together, and 2 of the 5 storylines is the successor of the governor in Septimont and the gladiators all merging in a grand finale. So we know that Septimont has a government sort of the same way that Jinzhou has a government and Jinshi, and they are filled with gladiators, so something that you would see in Rome with the Colosseum. Alright, so the next piece of information is from this NPC named Joanne. Now she can be found here in Raguna City itself, and you have to speak to her in the daytime to get this piece of dialogue, because during the night she has a different piece of dialogue. And it's here where Joanne confirms that Septimont is indeed a city just like Raguna. It says, Septimont is an autonomous city-state under rinascita, and the shipping routes between the two aren't tightly regulated. Now as you continue talking to Joanne, she mentions that Septimont is rich in tacitite, and that is where Raguna gets all of its tacitite from. Now tacitite is this ore or material that's able to carry the reverberations or resonance of energies. So basically it's the tacit cores that are on echoes, they are made out of tacitite and they carry the resonance. So to have more echoes you need more tacitite. Alright, then we're going to switch our time of day to night. Now Hector may be a reference to Paris's judgment and the fall of Troy, and this piece of dialogue is more of a funny relationship between Hector and Joanne. Hector is given leave for 2 days and he thus has to promise that he will not go and place any bets in Septimont's underground casinos for the gladiator fights. So again, those 2 stories that we read about in the essays of the Regenesi drama, there is a government that most likely controls the export of tacitite, and then there's the underground casinos where you can bet on gladiators. Alright, and the third and final piece is here in Penitence End by the Fool's Troop, or the Fool's Elysium, and you can go and talk to Lexia. Now Lexia mentions that in Septimont they prefer plays and dramas that are action-packed and filled with historical sagas and war. And 2 of the plays are the 300 Nights of Capitoline and Assassin's Journey. Now both of these names reference Assassin's Creed, and we'll get to that in a second. So everything we just went through are all the references to Septimont that are currently in the game. But now we need to bring together all these little pieces of information to create one big picture. So we mentioned the Assassin's Creed references when we were talking to Lexia, but that is not the only Assassin's Creed reference. Now over here I have one of the oldest videos on Wuthering Waves YouTube channel, and if we head to 1 minute 50, so around here, Wuthering Waves is talking about the engine they used for developing Wuthering Waves, Unreal Engine 4, and here we see some of the reference images and the designs in the game. Now if you look here on the right hand side, I don't know if YouTube's bitrate will show it, it literally says Ubisoft, and here in the center Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This picture over here and this picture over here are from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, The Fate of Atlantis DLC. So this video right here is the very first time we see Assassin's Creed as a reference for Wuthering Waves. The second ever Assassin's Creed reference came from these images teasing the characters of Rinascita. And if you zoom in here, you'll see Reguna Rinascita. Now this font is called Assassin's Creed, and it's present in all of the images. Now what I did in a previous video was use the Assassin's Creed font and type out Reguna Rinascita in the same style as Assassin's Creed, and you can see it is exactly the same. Now the next reference to Assassin's Creed is actually the Assassin's Creed 2 E3 trailer, or this reveal trailer. The storyboarding of version 2.0 story cinematics is the same as Assassin's Creed. So here we start off with a gondola in the water, going to a little kid running around the carnival. Now if we look at the Assassin's Creed 2 trailer, we start off with a gondola in the water, and there we go, into the carnival. And you'll see that the storyboarding, so the sequence from one scene to another, is very similar to that of Assassin's Creed 2. Now if we look at the names of the plays that Lexia mentions, she first mentions the 300 Nights of Capitoline. Now this is a reference to the Capitoline Triad and Capitoline Hill in Rome. The Capitoline Triad was a collection of the three isoscientists, so basically the three deities or three gods from Greco-Roman mythology, namely Juno, Jupiter, and Minerva. Now Juno is Hera, who we have covered before when talking about Fleur de Lis. Jupiter is Zeus, and Minerva is Athena. So when Wuthering Waves references Capitoline, they're also aware of the deities Juno, Jupiter, and Minerva, or Hera, Zeus, and Athena. And then there's the mentioning of Assassin's Journey. And if you journey through many of the Assassin's Creed games, you will journey through the Capitoline Triad. Now Capitoline is one of the 7 hills of Rome, or one of the 7 mountains that make up Septimont. And it's from Capitoline Hill that you can see the Temple of Jupiter, the Temple of Juno, and the Temple of Minerva. So this is what inspired Assassin's Creed to create the Capitoline Triad. And the final Assassin's Creed reference so far is the architecture of what we are calling Septimont. Now remember this shape of what we see above the clouds over here and of the building. Right, now here we are in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, The Fate of Atlantis DLC, the very DLC in Kuro's first ever Assassin's Creed reference. And if we take a look what's in front of me, we have this building here with a bit of a triangle shape, the same shape that's on the main building sticking out of the clouds. And we have this little square cube-like column sticking out over here, and in many other locations as well around Atlantis. This is Atlantis City. Now this is not to say that Kuro is retaking all of this and thus making it themselves. It's more so about the visual conceptualization of the architecture. Now of course, from ancient Greek we don't have video footage or anything, or a lot of really good information in one place on what the architecture was like. So this Assassin's Creed DLC is just a really good place to see what ancient Greek architecture was like. And specifically what's used in Atlantis is a mixture of Minoan and Greek architecture. Now the Minoan civilization was a very advanced culture that was located around the island of Crete. And this led to the belief that Plato's Atlantis and every story of Atlantis is attributed to the Minoan civilization. Now the architecture in Reguna and the name Rinascita is a reference to ancient Rome culture going all the way up until the Renaissance. But as I mentioned in a previous video, here in Shakona strip marketing, we have Ionic columns. And the Ionic column was primarily used in Greek architecture. The Romans did use Ionic, but they also included a Corinthian column with it to make their own composite column. And just a bit of proof, here in the very same DLC, there's the big building. We have an Ionic column over here, and here you can see more Ionic columns being used. And up here we have the Corinthian columns. Now this does look pretty similar to the columns in rinascita or Ragunna, but as I said, Corinthian and Ionic columns were used simultaneously or together to create the composite column that the Romans used. And then unfortunately it has turned to nighttime now, so it's a bit difficult to see, but up here we have the Doric column. So all over Atlantis here we have this Greek architecture, and a very good reference for anyone who wants to learn about Greek architecture. Now apart from the building shape and the architecture, there is a bit more. You see, there is the belief that Atlantis was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. And this is because along Crete and Santorini there is a volcano, and since Atlantis was believed to be in that area, there is the belief that a volcano erupted and submerged Atlantis. And in Wuthering Waves, we do have revived volcanoes. And the volcano was much more symbolic in ancient times than it is today. Especially so to the Romans that they even named the god who gave Achilles his shield Vulcan. And the Greek name for the Roman known as Vulcan is Hephaestus. Now Hephaestus or Vulcan is the god of blacksmiths and fire, and that's how we understand it in English. And here you can read some of the stories about Hephaestus. You'll see him mentioned in Homer's work and Hesiod's work. And one of the feats of Hephaestus was creating the shield of Achilles. Now I have mentioned many times that Zoni seems to be inspired by Achilles. And well, if this is true, then we should be able to prove that the shield that Zoni has is related to Hephaestus, or at least symbolic of Hephaestus. And well, let's prove it. Now one thing to note is that Hephaestus or Vulcan has a donkey as their sacred animal. Now keep the donkey in mind because here I have the Rover versus Frolova cutscene from version 2.0 at the end of the story, and we get to see Zoni use her shield. Alright, so right here I have the scene when Zoni puts down her shield, and as you can see very clearly we have the outline of what looks like a donkey's face. And just to be sure, here's a donkey face symbol. You can see the nostrils. Now the ears are pointed up in some, but like here in the others, they kind of go to the side. So when we look at the symbol, if it is a donkey, then it's a reference to Hephaestus. And now Hephaestus' sacred animal is not the only sacred animal that's being used. The cerulean bird in Shakona's job marketing looked like a cerulean bird, and that would be a reference to Aelios, the keeper of the floating island in the sky. We also have crabs all around Ragunna, which would be the sacred animal of Hera or Juno, or at least one of these sacred animals of Hera or Juno. And again, Juno is one of the characters in the Capitoline Triad. So now we know that Hephaestus is being referenced because of this symbol on the shield. How does it tie into the bigger picture? Well, as I mentioned, Hephaestus or Vulcan is the god of blacksmiths and fire. And if we look at the rules, which explains a bit more of Hephaestus's role in Greco-Roman mythology, we have fire, blacksmithing, metalworking, masonry, so the architecture that you see in Atlantis, forges, sculptures, and volcanoes. And the reason Hephaestus is so important is because nobody could craft things the way that Hephaestus could. So the Olympians like Zeus and Hera always wanted Hephaestus to be the creator of their architecture, and only very recently, thanks to MIT, we know that the reason volcanoes is linked with blacksmithing and fireworks and masonry is because they used very high temperatures to form their slate or their concrete. Now the Greeks did not use concrete as much as the Romans did, because the Romans perfected the super durable concrete. But the key to this concrete and the limestone in Greek architecture is from materials that have been formed at extreme temperatures. And what is the largest natural source of extreme temperatures? That would be volcanoes. Hence why Hephaestus is called Vulcan and related to volcanoes and fires and blacksmithing. And when we talk about volcanoes, we're also talking about the cause of Atlantis' submersion or destruction. Now, if we look at Crete, which is one of the theories of where Atlantis could have been, there is a volcano here situated near Santorini. So when we go back to Septimont, we have this Greek architecture and stone masonry over here with the buildings. That's very reminiscent of Atlantis portrayed in Assassin's Creed. Then we have 7 mountains making up the name Septimont, with the possibility that one of these mountains can have a volcano or a revived volcano according to the Jinjo Pioneer Association. Now this is where the last piece of the puzzle comes in to tie everything together and really suggests that Septimont is actually inspired by Atlantis. Now Atlantis, it was written about by Plato in his book Timaeus and Critias. I apologize if I got those names wrong. And it's in this piece of poetry that Plato wrote about Solon, yes, the very same spelling as our Solon, and his interaction with Egyptian priests that described Atlantis. And in verses 110 and 111, the area and the landscape of Atlantis is described. Poseidon was given the land of Atlantis as his territory. So the mainland in the center of the city of Atlantis was the most fertile land, and surrounding the city of Atlantis were mountains. So yes, we have Septimont, that's a Latin name that's also used to describe Rome, but we also have Atlantis, Greek architecture, volcanoes, and the city of Atlantis itself that is surrounded by mountains. And if we come back to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the Fate of Atlantis, and we count the amount of mountains around the city, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we have Septimont.